Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have a very special guest, that is John Jewett. Many of you will probably be aware of him because he is an IFBB heavyweight pro and a fantastic pro at that, who also is very, very deep into the science. He has a Master's of Science in Nutrition. He is a registered dietitian, and we get into how his methodologies have changed over time. We get into some peak week strategies and things like this. It's a fantastic chat, and no doubt John will be back on again. Also, to let you know, as ever, we have our online coaching at Revive Stronger. If you're interested in potentially being coached by one of the crew at Revive Stronger, then definitely check out that link in the description. But without further ado, let's get into the show. Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I'm very excited to talk to John Jewett. John is someone who I've been following maybe for like the last 6 months. I don't think it's been too much longer than that, maybe not, or maybe so, but he is someone who I've become very fond of and have been consuming a lot of his content. And I was just like, I need to get John on the show. Some of you might not be aware who John is because this is the first time he's been on. So I'll do a brief intro and then we'll dig into things a bit. But he is an IFBB Pro bodybuilder since 2016. He has a Master's of Exercise Science in Nutrition. Sorry, exercise. Why did I add exercise there? It's just science in nutrition. He has an RD, so he's a registered dietitian as well. And he's currently 8 days out from the Chicago Pro. So he's been very, very good with his time. And if he is at all, I mean, he's actually going to be speaking very well, probably better than me because I've just fumbled up a ton of stuff. And actually, I found it incredibly interesting. I was just checking over your website and everything and how like you broke 12 world records in powerlifting before you transitioned into now where you are in bodybuilding. And I'm just like, dude, is there anything this guy can't do? So how are things on your end, John? I know you're doing all right today.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, thanks for having me. And admittedly, I think I was following Revive and yourself for longer than you were following me, and listening to your podcast because of the information that was just quality that you're putting out. Because I'm at heart a nerd. I know I have this muscle body, but deep down, there's just this science guy in me. So to see more evidence-based material being pushed out, science-focused, I was just like right on board with it. So I loved all the stuff that y'all have been putting out. And like at some point, I was like, man, I hope Steve asked me to come on the podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
Really excited to do it. So finally here I am, and a pleasure to be here talking with you. 8 days out or not, I have time for Steve Hall and Revive.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, actually, that I'm like fanboying over here, and like to know that you were actually following this beforehand and that just is very humbling to know that the size of the podcast, the people I interview, are kind of reaching people like yourself. And obviously, I spoke about your master's background in nutrition. You're an RD. You obviously take the science seriously, which is why when I found you and started listening to your content, I was just like, oh, this is someone like I feel like I'm on a level with, whereas I can't say that for everyone who like is just huge and jacked. Like it's not the same.
Yeah, you can get pretty huge and jacked just throwing around weight and grunting and lifting stuff, and you might ever have to touch a textbook ever. And it seems like a lot of the this. I hate to like group like our IFBB Pro world into that, but it seems like there's this division that people make in the science community, and then there's like the IFBB, right? And it's like, oh yeah, those guys, don't listen to them, they're just meatheads, which isn't all true. But it's definitely easy for these guys to just throw on weight, make a ton of progress, and maybe never have to dig deep into the sciences. But for me, it was always about how I want to understand it, for one, but also make sure I'm not wasting time doing things that I shouldn't be. And also put more time into the areas that I want to. So, looking through evidence and science was always the thing. Of course, I'm a bro first, right? I started during the gym. I didn't know anything, just knew to train hard. And that got me a lot of results. But to really eke out everything I think you need, especially at this level, and with the way that we are in just every single sport, we're at an advanced area. So bodybuilding should be the same. So whether it is IFBB, natural, or enhanced, there's so much to gain from sciences. But let us never forget that in the trench experience, I still think should be heavily weighed. But yeah, I'm a nerd, but I love to train hard, and I'm a bro too. So.
So people know now why I was excited to talk to John, because he's clearly kind of, I mean, that's evidence-based practice right there. Like you like to use the science, keep up to date with it, but you have your own practical experience in the field as well.
Yeah, in the field, experience is evidence. It's lowly weighed evidence, and a lot of time it's kind of murkied by like, well, look, this guy did it, you know. But nonetheless, it is experience. Or if you have a coach that's never been in a research lab ever, but he's had hundreds and hundreds of clients, so like this guy's picked up some type of value, and we can't ever just dismiss that. And I feel like some people kind of get on one side of the fence about it, which it's only science-based, and they kind of lose sight of actually where the rubber meets the road. Then you have other guys that are just so, you know, application-based that it's harder for them to pick out what's working and what's not. And maybe they get a little too dogmatic in certain approaches, and it leads them to, you know, poor applications or giving out poor information for others. So it's usually, kind of got to mix both in together. And I think that's where you can really find the practitioner that can lead you in the right direction.
For sure. Yeah, I wonder, because I think sometimes it's a case of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And people kind of, whatever they get results with first, they kind of stick with that. And I wonder if you think kind of your background of you were educated and you were interested in science before you were ever like really jacked. Do you think that gave you that kind of respect for the science and how actually I can use this stuff to help me? I don't have to be closed-minded to it. Do you think that's what kind of, or it's just your personality type that's kind of led you to be the way you are?
It's probably is a mix of both. And of course I was curious about the sciences and how things work. I remember in seventh grade, I was reading about how creatine monohydrate would work and learning about creatine phosphate stores. And no one in seventh grade knew that. You know, I was just like, well, how does it work? Like what, you know? And so I had a curiosity towards it. But also back then, I didn't have the information exposure that we do now. Now it's almost information overload, to where it's like, where should you pick to put your time to the information? When I was first starting working out, and I was been lifting since I was in like sixth grade. Back then, you just had magazines, and those weren't, you know, great information. And even to find a coach, like people weren't online coaching, or even who would you even ask for this? So you just kind of didn't have the information there. So you have to ask people that were just around you that might have experience. And that could still, like we mentioned, like you don't know who you're talking to, and you don't know how to filter that content at a young age. So it still led me to have approaches that were not quite science-based yet. Maybe a logical thought process, or, you know, I would see results, and that would kind of lead me to continue to do so. Because like I mentioned, you can train hard and it can get you very, very far, especially at like a younger age when I was starting out. That was enough. And I had some good early influences from some older guys. One of my dad's friends, he bodybuilded for years. He actually, like thinking back on it now, like when I finally had someone give me instruction, and that was actually in seventh grade. He came when I had a little home gym, and he's like, this is what you want to do. And it wasn't what I was expecting. For one, he brought a Flex magazine with him. I remember it had Lee Priest on it, and nothing against Lee Priest, but he said, listen, if you ever want to look like this, everyone in this magazine is on steroids. He's like, don't ever think you're going to look like this without doing it. I'm like, okay, well, that's very real. You know, most people aren't that real with you when you're in seventh grade. And they're like, and he's like, don't ever do it. But if you're going to, come ask me about it first. He's like, okay, fair enough. And then he put me on a full body training program 3 days a week. I was like, but what about, you know, like, I just want chest day out. Back then I was just doing bench press and curls all like 3 days a week. And so it was a full body routine he put me on. And I would like start with squats and like go from bigger muscle groups down to smaller. It was like 8 exercises. I'm like, thinking back, I was like, what a great beginner program that I had started on. But the thing was my adherence was poor. I got really bored with it quick, rotating through these lifts. So eventually just kind of jumped around from there. But I guess that was the issue back then, is like having the right information to be influenced. And I was really strong back then for just surrounding myself. Like once you start getting in the weight room in high school, I'm like, man, I had like the top bench press in my freshman high school football team. It's like, I'm really good at this. I'm strong. And I found out about powerlifting, and that's kind of what led me to chase like down the strength game and find some guys in that were experienced, because I don't know, where are you going to read about powerlifting and science? So I had some other guys that were like in their 40s powerlifting that were teaching me, and they were just meathead bros, that were really strong. So it's like, well, that weighed enough science for me to do. So started powerlifting with these guys just because naturally that's what I was good at and gravitated towards, and led me to do that for 8 years, all through college, until I just was like, I kind of did what I want. I was starting to beat my own. I had like some world records, and in powerlifting, it's kind of frustrating because there's like over 10 organizations in different weight classes. And that same guy in your age bracket has a world record. It's like, well, I have one too. It's like, yeah, we all have world records. So it's like, I just kind of got done with it. I'm like, I'm really strong. I don't look as strong as I am, or people would be like, oh yeah, are you like 200 pounds? I'm like, no, I'm 220, It's like, I didn't quite look the part. I always wanted to look the part. But I was super meticulous with nutrition. I already had an Excel file tracking all my stuff. So that's what kind of led me into bodybuilding from there.
It's really interesting to hear about that background as well. And I think powerlifting, like a lot of bodybuilders could learn from powerlifters, in terms of like powerlifters are focused on that progressive overload because they know their ultimate goal is to lift more. And that sometimes gets missed with bodybuilders. I mean, to maybe the niche we're in, more people realize it and they realize other ways of progression as well. But I think in the past, it was like, I don't know, Arnie was all about the pump and people just lost sight of adding load and making things harder over time. Whereas you had that kind of like probably pummeled into you from powerlifting.
It definitely gave me a different introduction into bodybuilding than what others were, because in powerlifting, it was making sure you're progressing in strength and you already had a logbook of something to track your progress over time. My big influence was like Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell and the conjugate method. So it was like having these max effort days, which I don't think I would have survived if I kept doing powerlifting, because it was like your max effort days were basically you would max out on these lifts every single week. And I was young, so I could do it then. But I guess that carried me. My first initial exposure to bodybuilding was through Elite FTS with Dave Tate. And they had some bodybuilders that were putting some information out on there, which was Justin Harris, Shelby Starnes. At that time, it was Troponin Nutrition. And these guys were speaking like in this kind of sciencey, terms. It was like, okay, they seem like they know what they're talking about. They were doing DC dog crap training, like from Dante Trudell. And I read through this, like, this logically makes a lot of sense, and it connected well with the powerlifter in me, right? You have a logbook, you need to form progressive overload every workout, and you're not going to have a small chest if you're benching like 400 pounds for 10 reps. Like, yes, that makes sense. And so that was like my first transition, was doing DC training from powerlifting, which was nice because, like you said, I had like the progressive mindset to keep progressing the stimulus up. The issue was, from coming from powerlifting, it was still very much like point A to point B. Yeah. So like the where the tension was, what the execution looked like, a lot of that was sacrificed. So that was like the downside of coming from that. Effort level was insane. Like I could go as far as I need to, beyond and past failure, from like the powerlifting background. Like I knew how to grind reps. And I think those things alone were going to take me pretty far. The downside with that too is that, well, you don't manage your fatigue very well. And you also aren't very great at managing like injuries from cropping up too. So there was good and bad to it. Would I have rather gone the other route where I was just kind of pumping weights and just going off intuition, how I felt, and not have a program? No, I am where I am because of what I did. Yeah. But I think the model of what like Dante Trudell put out was there. It was my interpretation of that model was a little bit powerlifter biased, because if you actually listen to Dante, he preaches all these things about standardizing form and range of motion and proper execution, tensional muscles. But I was kind of like oblivious to that and kind of read around that to like, move weight and move the logbook up at all costs. It's like, no, that's not what that should have meant.
Yeah, it's an easy trap to get into that I think a lot of people have fallen into as well. And actually, out of interest, do you have any injuries? Like, how are you at this time?
Pretty good, actually. Nothing major. Had some minor tears. I think my worst injury that I've ever had was my hamstring. I tore it sprinting.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's when I was powerlifting and learning sprinting mechanics in one of our classes, and just went full throttle in a sprint when I hadn't sprinted in like 2 years.
Yeah.
And dropping that hamstring down to hip extension in a fully lengthened position, just felt it pop and turn black and purple. And I actually did a powerlifting meet like 2 weeks later, bench press only. That was probably the worst one I've had. I have some minor pec tear, little things, little niggles here and there. My major ones that affected my bodybuilding were I tore my rec fem doing a split squat when I was 12 weeks out from the New York Pro in 2018. And then the next year, I tore my right one doing the same movement. And I was like 16 weeks out. It was a little less. But if you look at my rec fems, you can see the difference between them. My left leg is a little different than my right leg now. But that's been the most major thing. Nothing like skeletal wise or ligament wise.
That's good.
So fortunate there.
I know that holds a lot of, well, I mean, you just have to, you look at someone like Ronnie Coleman, like he had that powerlifting background. He applied that to bodybuilding quite in a big way and got huge, but paid the price. Maybe unnecessarily, like you can always say these maybes, can't you? But
you don't know, right? Like that's Ronnie, like he was one of the tops, right? So it's like, to change that, who knows? Would he be the same? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
It's so hard. I mean, we still haven't had another kind of Ronnie. I mean, everyone's their own person, aren't they? So it's difficult anyway, but it's great that you're not injured. And actually that's something, again, as someone who, I mean, not that I'm thick into the kind of IFBB scene or the enhanced scene particularly, but I will see people, I see big guys and they don't lift the way you lift, John. Like you lift pristine, like you mentioned there, control, range of motion. And I guess that leads to one of the topics I was going to come to is kind of like your change in methodologies. Like how does your training look now versus how it used to look? What are the biggest things that are kind of changed there?
Yeah, I think for one, from powerlifting, like you are a technique specialist in a sense that you're trying to get the most efficient at moving from point A to point B. So there is like a very, well executed form in that sense, but it's not so much as like trying to get you're almost in bodybuilding, you're almost trying to get the least efficient at
absolutely
way to find the lightest load you need to give you the most stimulus you can. And basically we're just trying to move origin to insertion points and put as much tension between those points as possible, which that wasn't the powerlifter mindset. So it took a while before I could really put a lot of value into that. And I think there was a slow transition along the way to really develop it. Over the past 2 years has probably been the greatest change. I've never been extremely sloppy though. Don't get me wrong. I was never just throwing around weights. There was always a pretty controlled form. And part of that I think was from powerlifting. I'd still knew to lift within control, and just seeing you guys sling on weights, it made no sense to me. But definitely like, I'm trying to think of like a moment or who was a big influence within that. I can't identify particularly one. Once I started working with Matt Jansen as a coach, this was in 2015. That kind of opened me up to a little bit more as training wise. Matt still had a very much like this kind of like hard effort training, but also he was speaking more on exercise form and execution, which got me thinking, okay, there's these paths that I need to be taking with my form. And then moving forward there, like once I started getting a little bit more injuries crop up is when I'm getting older. It's like, well, how can I change this to be more efficient? And so there's been a lot of influence, a lot of good information that's come out these past years on it, like with Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach.
Right.
That's probably one of the first guys I saw really talking about more thought out movement selection and exercise setup for how your own personal mechanics are and how you can align yourself more with machines and finding movements that create bracing and stability within these patterns so we can apply more stimulus to the intended muscle. So I've just been picking things up along the years now, and that got me to really understand. And I think once I dug deeper, like in my master's and learning more about, what what really is driving hypertrophy and how do we increase that stimulus? That's when I'm like, okay, these dots are starting to connect more and I need to control these movements. And that really should be the of what is coming first. And for me to standardize a repetition, get the most out of that repetition, and then move up from there. Then we could talk about sets and volume and et cetera, and then move into effort. I think a lot of times because I jump to effort first, right, over execution, somewhat. There's middle ground. I think both need to apply, but I think you have guys on some sides of the fence that are like, well, it's all about, execution, and they never lift hard enough.
Yeah.
And then you have some guys that are just lifting crazy hard and they just never get their form down. I would go with the former of like, hey, just lift really hard, and that's probably going to get you farther than just like never lifting hard enough. But sure. Yeah, it's been a slow transition along the way. And also with what I'm putting out now, education wise, like I want to try not to be right, but I don't want to put out information that's going to harm someone. And I want information that's going to help someone progress forward and get the most out of their bodybuilding journey. So they're not like me when I'm finally like 34. It's like, man, I wish I knew this like 10 years ago. And I think a lot of younger guys are picking up on this stuff now and seeing the importance of it from a longevity standpoint. Because we know, Steve, like to do this well, you need to be doing this for like years. It's not just what is the next 12 weeks hold for you. It's like, how do I bodybuild for another 10 years? And that's been such in the forefront of my mind being, I'll actually be 35 next week. And how do I do this for another 5 years or whatever it may be? Because I'm getting to that kind of peak, maybe,
right.
Might not, who knows how much longer I'll be able in it, but those are important things to think about.
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take the moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up. See you there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think unfortunately, a lot of us do need like you need an event to force you to change. And sometimes it is an injury or something like that. And like you said, there is really good information, but yeah, you need a combination of all these things, right? You can't have all the volume. You're going to get nowhere if you have the other parts not there. You need the right kind of amount of each. I guess out of interest, I guess this was always going to be a topic that comes up, but effort levels, like you said, you had the effort levels. You came from that kind of powerlifting DC background, and a lot of actually, I don't know. I think it said a lot of the enhanced guys, the IFBB pros train like, I guess they all train incredibly hard. You have to, but train to failure like all the time, year round. Maybe even don't have deloads, things like this. And you spoke to fatigue management. I'd be interested to hear if your perspectives changed on that. How your kind of effort levels, if you periodize those at all, if you do have deload periods or anything like that to help with the kind of longevity and the overall just like plan as a whole.
Yeah. So I think saying like to lump out all the IFBB, like everyone just trains to failure at all time. I think we just get a exposure to a lot of these guys off of what we might see just on Instagram and guys posting like their craziest sets, right, for the gram. And so you're like, oh, that's like this guy trains all the time. But I think if you look at like some of the probably even the top influencers in the IFBB or guys that are IFBB pros as well that coach a lot of these individuals, that's far from the case. And it might not be as clear cut as like having this like beautiful training template Excel file where you clearly see it. But I think a lot of these guys is intuitively built in just from training in the trenches for years. And a lot of them aren't training to failure all the time. And there's sets that are less. But if you start labeling these guys like with reps in reserve, they don't like it, even though they're using it. Right. It's like someone that lived on an island and they were never exposed to time, a clock or anything. And we said, hey, it's 12 o'clock. They're like, oh, no. I don't go by time. It's like, well, there's thing time. It does exist. And like, you don't have to like say that it's 12 o'clock, but it is 12 o'clock somewhere in the world. It's like these guys, like, yeah, you're not labeling it as a 2 RIR, but you're still not going up to true failure. So I think the labels is what some guys just get up in arms about, because it's like affecting their, their identity as being alpha masculine, training hard. And that it's just not the case. That's not how it is. But I think a lot of the guys don't truly train all out all the time. And there's moments of it, and it's built in when they can manage it. Now, some guys, if they're just oblivious and just train way beyond all the time, they're ones that are probably digging themselves in holes. And I've done that. So that's partly why like the program would be fairly static back like, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. And effort level would stay pretty high. So it would be at near failure at pretty much all times within safe to do so. So there's lifts like a squat or leg press. Like I'm not going to be crawling out of a leg press ever. I never did that. So back then I was still, getting maybe that last rep on my own, or leaving one there when I felt like technique was really breaking down. And so maybe it wasn't a 1 RIR. Then there's like movements that I would probably actually go to failure on. I would never I don't think I remember going for reps that were like way out in left field though, right? Like I barely get one. It's like, let's go for it anyway. And you only move it like an inch. But, and so back then, like as far as regulating volume and training, I was completely disconnected with the idea of fatigue and what training was doing and how I felt on prep. I think I associated that more with like diet fatigue, right? I'm low calorie. And so I feel low energy. Sleep is poor because of that, but I disconnected the training aspect, maybe being the largest driver in part of that fatigue. And so I would never think to adjust training. I needed training to stay the same to hold on to tissue, which is true to a sense, but there's also some area where you could remove that volume back. And so for the most part, I would stay pretty stagnant back then. I remember working with Matt is basically if we would move from phases and maybe recovery would drop off, we'd add in a rest day. So the overall program could stay the same. You just have spread out your volume more. I didn't realize this back then, but that's all we were doing. We were kind of changing frequency. So there was this regulation kind of occurring, but it wasn't to the extent that we know today of how we've like really broken down like what drives fatigue and how to manage it so much more. But moving now, how my training is set up currently. So I still keep a relatively stagnant RIR for the most part. And I will run mesocycle phases, and they'll be auto-regulated for most of the part. And because I've built in a lot of that intuition and have been able to separate myself emotionally. But like even years ago, there's no way. Like I was so emotionally tied, the deload would have to come to meet me. By an injury happening or digging myself into the ground. And I wouldn't have the signs to know when to pull back. And now I've gotten really good at knowing, but I'm also have just through experience know like so many weeks I know I can't go longer, and I have to be a little bit proactive as well. So usually like deloads are like every 6 weeks is like they're blocked in. Right. But at the same time, I'm reactive as well. Nice. So, if I'm training phenomenally and everything's going great, it's like, well, you feel great and strength's progressing. Like, should you take a deload? It's like, well, I feel it. No, take one. Right. That's like, well, why? I feel really good. Maybe I should be increasing training, or maybe I shouldn't. At the same time, it's like, oh, I feel terrible, but my deload's in another week. Oh, just dig hard, dig yourself a hole the last week because you're going to deload anyway. It's like, well, no, usually that's when I've actually really messed myself up, digging even deeper level of fatigue. And I haven't quite bought into the idea of like super compensation. And I think you have to go to go way high stimulus, and you have to go way low into like a recovery phase. And I think mine's been a little bit less aggressive. So for like, I'll give you an example of meso would be like a introduction week with a relatively set volume amount. RR is slightly dialed back, but not too far. I'm still like trained pretty close, maybe like a 1 RR, and on deloads I'm maybe at a 2. So I'll have like maybe this introduction week, depending on where I came from. Then that second week is where I can really dial in my plan. So look how this is kind of like into it. Like, I know we write stuff down on paper, and you go train, you're like, oh, that worked out terrible, right?
Yeah.
or it's like this movement didn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
So that second week is like dialing it in, but then I'm pretty much turn it on. So I'm not by any means this new person to, well, there's like a lot of, cross lifts, integration that happens. So I'm not having to learn these new movements. So I don't need this like large introduction phase. So relatively second week, I'm up and moving with about the volume level that I'm going to ride out for several weeks. And RIR will be pushed on compounds around 1, and mainly isolations are around 1. It's rare that I ever take something out to true failure anymore. And I hold the RIR fairly stagnant across my meso. And if anything, there might be some set additions that occur across. It's just kind of, those are kind of auto-regulated. And mainly those set additions for me would be usually on isolation movements, or specialization phase for where I'm at in my development wise. And that, I think you need context to that. So I have completely different plans I put together for other people, but this is talking about me. So arguably my volume target is pretty narrow comparatively to someone that's intermediate or maybe in a beginner. So me adding in a set is a pretty large addition, and it can easily throw me too far to the right into fatigue. So, and also my progression is going to be smaller too. So I'm going to need to sit with some volume level probably for a good amount of time and just let load and rep progressions occur. And so pretty much fatigue will accumulate just through doing that alone, and then have to deload from there. And that's kind of how I run my training phases. So I'm never reaching up into this high volume accumulation that requires this large volume reduction of a deload. So it's a little less dynamic. It's kind of a slower climb. And then I'm realized, okay, it's time for this deload. I'm starting to fatigue a little bit. Mental focus is starting to weigh. Hunger signal is decreasing. And then I'll deload. It won't require as much, and I can pick back up into my next training block. But I won't require also having to go to like this really low starting volume point because I'm not waving up as high or low. That makes sense.
Yeah, completely. I think a lot of the listeners are aware of like the volume landmarks, and they know like MEV, MRV. And when you're as advanced as you are, your MEV is probably pretty high and your MRV equally isn't that high. So the window between where we're growing, I mean, you haven't got that much room because you're flipping humongous.
And and also too is like I'm a 212 competitor, so I'm not someone that's trying to add on 20 pounds of stage weight in a year like whoever's doing that. So I have to kind of pick and choose for one, my rate of weight progression, and also usually these phases are specialization. So most of the other body parts are moved to a maintenance volume. So that's for one, why those body parts, I just hold set volume stagnant because I'm not trying to drive up stimulus over weeks. Just the stimulus, just the progression within those sets of load and reps. Even closer to a maintenance, I'll grow body parts like quads. I'll do 4 sets a week for quads, and they will grow off that. So then if I have like maybe chest or traps or something, that might be the spot where volume would be raised. And so the overall meso would have a higher volume component for those. And that might have some set additions, it might not. You have to really weigh in, like I see adding a set in as a big drop of a hammer of a stimulus. And how fast am I growing in relation to like weekly to require that much more stimulus? And arguably, I don't know if you're going to be growing as fast as you need that stimulus addition. At least that's what I've seen with me, but I'm not growing as fast as I used to as a beginner too. Yeah. So yeah, for me, 212 competitor, I have a body weight limitations. So usually these phases are specialization focused to where I'm having to like maybe jump up volume a little bit on a certain muscle group, bring others back to maintenance volume, and then I could rotate that to a different specialization if I needed. But I think once you get to this level, pretty much your weak body parts are always your weak body parts, and you might find yourself always running a specialization cycle. And that's kind of what it has been for me. So usually it's leg days are once a week, and there is a push back day twice a week, and it's like upper back focused always and chest focused always on the push days. And that's what has led me to my current kind of training.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I think what's lovely about that is, I mean, it's clear you're a coach because you're kind of referring to principles and telling people like, this is how I do it. But I mean, especially the audience that's listening to this, I mean, very few of them are going to be anywhere near at your level. So it's the principles that they need to draw from that in terms of, oh, you're talking about auto-regulating your volume, or the, like, you need a specialization because of where you're at that they probably don't.
You're right, definitely. And how I can pick up into hard effort training right away because I've learned the execution of these movements and there's carryover amongst all lifts, while someone else, if they're new to lifting, they introduce a completely new lift, like it would make sense for them to stay away from failure for this lift and maybe do more sets to learn the movement pattern and farther away from failure, they would probably get plenty of stimulus. And arguably for someone that's more advanced, maybe it is just the last rep or 2 reps that really are stimulative. I don't know. We don't have this, like, for these really advanced guys, we don't really know. We know it's like somewhere in there, but for like someone that's actually as a bodybuilder at this level, and we have a few studies like in some moderately trained individuals that like, hey, maybe it's 2 reps in reserve. Like, are you willing to leave that on the table? Like, or just go for that 1 extra rep? So you kind of have to read through a lot of this, and it's definitely application based. And you can't just, we try to put out some general templates for people, right?
Yeah.
But eventually you have to cater it down to the individual needs.
Yeah, it's interesting even thinking back, like I brought up Arnie and like the pump and like chasing those elements. And I guess that actually has some relevance to training, at least for me. Like I found that to help my auto-regulation in terms of, oh, how does that individual, I'm trying to target the quad. How does the quad actually feel? Is it getting a pump? Is it feeling like it's damaged? How's it recovering the next days within the context of progressive overload? Are those some of the things you're looking at when you're auto-regulating? Am I recovering on time? Are you looking at any of those things to kind of give you clue-ins to, like, I guess, stimulus that a certain exercise is giving you?
Yeah, so I think there's some objective and good subjective measures to go off of. For one, like just within the session, and it's easy because I'll get on different tracks, right? I'll get real like sciencey and like just look at just the program, the planning, the sets and the reps and everything. And it's easy to get away from like the beauty and art of actually lifting. Yeah. And I put a lot more weight into that of like, how does this movement pattern actually look? And what is the stimulus I'm getting out of? Like, do I feel tension, some type of tension in that target muscle that I'm trying to work? And because we, have individuals that come to me and they're like, I can't build chest. You see them do it. It's like, oh yeah, your execution's all wrong. Or their execution looks really good and they still don't build the chest. It's like, what's going on? And there's something much deeper there. Like a lot of times you have a mobility or movement dysfunction pattern that's leading to some type of neurological issue where you could do it perfect and you're still not getting the right neural activity in that muscle group. And that goes way beyond just, hey, I had the right number of sets there. It's into actually looking at how someone's moving. And maybe you need some type of neurological type programming to assist with that. So I think, going into a session, like in the exercises I'm picking, like, do I feel tension while I'm doing that movement? In getting done with the set, do I feel some type of distress occurring in that muscle or getting a pump in that muscle? And pump's pretty subjective. Like, what if you didn't have enough fluids, you didn't eat enough that day? But in general sense, like you should be feeling something in that target muscle. Then the following day, like, did you get sore in that area? And again, that's kind of a subjective thing. You might not always get sore. Yeah. Soreness doesn't mean you had a good hypertrophy workout. But it might give you some indication that what you're training and intended to is what it was. Still, I go off the logbook more so objectively. It's kind of subjective too. But if I was able to actually move up in progression in some way, whether it's load or reps, but I have to keep in mind, like, did I get a better stimulus as far as like my execution goes? Because maybe I didn't change my load or reps, but I reached such a more direct tension in that muscle that was a progression in stimulus too. If I matched rep and load, but my form improved, well, that's a progression. Yeah. And it shows that there was an adaptation that occurred from my previous training session. I think that was the biggest, huge, like, and that was from Brian
Miner.
Brian Miner, there you go. You probably knew it right away. Like, he totally blew my mind when he was talking about the logbook and the stimulus and the adaptation.
Chicken or the egg.
Exactly. I completely flipped on that one, because I used to go to the gym thinking I need to make a new stimulus or progress the stimulus somehow to lift more. And all I was doing was just trying harder. That doesn't necessarily mean that the previous session caused I made the right stimulus last session that caused the adaptation, and I had the recovery ability to present that adaptation in my current training session. So now the logbook is more of a marker of recovery, but also a marker of adaptation occurring. And you have to weigh out, is it strength adaptations? Are you lifting different, et cetera? There's a lot of, it's kind of subjective, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it gives us a little bit of objective trend line over time. So from my last session, did I have a decline in performance, maintain, or improvement? And off that kind of gives me some idea of my recoverability. Now, if I had a decline, it's like, well, was it just, did I have poor sleep? Did I miss on nutrition? Kind of go through my check marks of recovery. Did I have a very stressful day? Okay, maybe it was just that session. Did I feel great and I still had a decline? Well, then it kind of would make me wonder, like, and if that's still occurring, maybe I need some more training stimulus. Maybe I'm starting to have to progress something up like that. That would probably be more indicative, I think, for a beginner or someone new. My thing for myself personally would definitely be probably recovery starting to drop down if I'm seeing a decline in performance, and that cumulative fatigue is occurring. So the logbook is probably my biggest marker still that I would use of like a week to week workout to workout progression that's occurring. Now at my level, like if I have, some workouts that I'm not really seeing it, or maybe I just see it in one set, that's enough for me, okay, that we're still moving up here. I might see it slowly decline over the weeks. I'm like, okay, this deload is probably due, and I'm probably also at a correct training volume. Because what I've done in the past is you keep reducing volume and you can keep training performance up really high. Then all of a sudden you realize, like, you know what, I'm doing a strength training program. I'm declining volume to maintain intensity of effort and intensity of load. It's like, okay, no, you need to like hold this volume level and see if it's moving. It should be moving up, and it might slowly move up into a point. Other things. So I think back on my sleep, but also tracking the sleep quality itself, tracking what I usually notice, the biggest thing is my work capacity and mental focus and kind of a brain fog that I'll feel. And that's the first things that I'll usually pick up on and not feel quite as motivated to go to the gym. And that's when I know, like, subjectively fatigue's accumulating. A lot of my clients I also used, I got from Scott Stevenson. He uses a perceived recovery scale. Yeah. It's a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being like, hey, I feel highly energetic and highly recovered. 1 feel like I feel zero motivation, extremely tired and fatigued. The subjective scale it's been validated. It's actually pretty good. I think if we go off too many like really objective things, like I know people use like their O-rings or heart rate variability, and I think a lot of these things, like it's to pick up the acute things, it's kind of just intuitive. Like you wake up, you're like, man, I slept like shit. I feel terrible. It's like, well, my O-ring says I'm good to go. Sweet. It's like, dude, you're totally missing the forest for the tree there. Like, if you feel terrible, don't go train or do a light session. So I think a lot of this can go off the subjective scales and work pretty well. So that's usually what I am going off of. I don't track heart rate or heart rate variability or anything like that. Looking at resting heart rate. I do track blood glucose and blood pressure. Partially not so to use like acute as far as like seeing fatigue accumulate, although you could see it change. Definitely see it. I think this is more application with the enhanced side of bodybuilding, or it doesn't have to be even natural. If you're driving body weight really high and reaching higher body fat levels, you might see blood glucose trend up, but you probably are getting really, really fat or have some genetic predisposition to see that occur. But in the enhanced side, you can see it occur at much lower body fats, just driving inflammation and insulin resistance from the presence of androgens and growth hormone. So I have a lot of guys that will track that anyway, but usually we'll see more, the body's kind of swelling, joints are hurting, digestion starting to get impeded, and they're having to like choke down food. And these are all marker signs for one, probably fatigue's really high, but also systemic stress and inflammation is really high. So I'll track those things, and especially for enhanced guys, tracking blood pressure, because that's like the silent, I think it's like the silent killer of for a lot of people, but also for bodybuilders, just being a large body. You know, whether you're natural enhanced, like you're pushing anabolic processes all the time and you're heavy, you're putting more strain on the body. So monitoring blood pressure would make a lot of sense. So those are two of the more objective things that I do track.
Cool. And obviously you're tracking performance, like you said, which is pretty objective too. So, and I love
kind of ramble there, Steve. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's good. Like I'm just like nodding my head thinking like I love how you look at your logbook and you can use that data and it's valuable, and I can see how your brain's working through it all, which is it's fantastic.
It's a diagnostic tool. So I have all these tools, and it kind of paints me a picture to make decisions.
Because I think a lot of people feel lost, and they just go and they just are like, oh, I can't go hard anymore, so I just back off. And so it's great to hear how much you actually consider your training, you think through it, and you don't just, I don't know, if you have a bad session, it's just not like there's one answer. Let's check everything else and then we make a call. So again, that's the coach in you.
Yeah, I think like when you go to the doctor's office, right? He looks over your lab work. He looks over your subjective signs of what you're saying. He does a physical exam, and he takes all these data points, objective and subjective, and then finally comes up with a diagnosis and a treatment plan. I think we should be doing this kind of the same thought process in bodybuilding, which is hard because it takes a critical thinker. But a lot of times we're self-coached, so we kind of have to develop that skill set along the way. But yeah, taking all these tools, subjective, objective, coming up with an accurate diagnosis of what's going on, then making the intervention, monitoring, reassessing, and redoing that intervention strategy.
Yeah. That's science.
One reference that I thought was really cool was from Eric Helms, and he has a training book out.
Muscle and strength pyramids.
Yeah. That's it. He had a really cool tool in there that had like a 4 or 5 question, yes or no, and for deload, if you need a deload, it's like, was your sleep poor, and has performance declining, and are you less motivated to train? It's like if you had, I think, over 2 yeses, it would be do a deload or take a light session. If no, well, keep going, or continue to the next mesocycle. And so I thought that was a beautiful thing, because like you said, people get really lost because you have all these things like, okay, this is happening. Like, should I do it or should I not do it? And it's never that black and white, but I think for people that are trying to figure it out, like Eric Helms gave a pretty nice tool to kind of like try to have an assessment and an intervention for someone that's trying to figure it out. So that was a cool resource that I had come across. But I think being the critical thinking bodybuilder and logging our stuff is part of what needs to happen to make the most of it, especially when you're not just trying to rely on genetics. And who is, right? You can't change it anyway. So let's just make the most of the variables that we can control.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up.
No, absolutely. That's awesome. And we've ended up talking mostly about training the whole time, which is great because now I have even more I want to get you on the show again, because I have no doubt people are going to have loved this. But something you mentioned there, which maybe we can kind of close on, is the being self-coached. And I'm pretty sure you're coaching yourself into all your kind of this season. Is that the first time you've done that? How's that gone?
No, actually. So my first 3 years of bodybuilding, I coached myself.
Okay.
And I don't know, I feel like when I started, which was 2011, that's kind of what you did, or you had some like friend that maybe helped you out, or, and so I just read a lot. And my first prep, I got on bodybuilding.com, and Layden Norden put out this prep series. I don't know if you recalled seeing this. He went through everything. Peak week, he had a very thought out explanation of it. So even my first peak week was reasonable. I didn't do anything drastic, which is like, hey, you did really good back then. Then you kind of went led astray. But I picked up as much material as I could and read as much as I could to try to do it on my own. And so that was the first 3 years. And once I got qualified for nationals, I was like, man, I don't want to mess this up. I really want someone to help me. And that's when I got introduced to Matt. And he really helped take my physique to another level because he had so much experience working with some top level guys, and just gave me that knowledge set that, man, who knows if I would have ever gotten it otherwise. So there was a lot of value to having someone teach me along the way, and pulled out a lot of great stuff from Matt. And then I left Matt and wanted, because I've always wanted, I loved self-coaching. Like I love that. I love the process. Even with Matt, I was involved in the process of like giving him all the data that I was collecting, and so he could make the right decisions, or we would start making them together, which is really cool when you get that coach athlete relationship where it's a collaboration, which I think it should be. And you should be building that competency and autonomy in your clients to where they have the knowledge set of the plan, what to monitor in the plan, and relay it to the coach. So I was developing that with Matt, but man, I always wanted to just do it myself too, because I was so meticulous and detailed and learn along the way. Like no one's going to monitor myself more closely than myself, right? I have all data, kind of limited by working with someone online in a sense. So I did one show on my own, that I did a whole off season on my own, where I really improved my physique a lot in the off season. And then coming back, I was like, I was stubborn. I'm like, I'm going to make sure that I can take myself to the pro level show. On my own, I did a prep with Matt. Then 2 weeks later, I did my own peak. So, and I had Andrew Vu was kind of a friend that was kind of keeping an eye on me. So I communicated with Andrew Vu throughout my whole off season. I was still coaching myself though, but I was about 4 weeks out from Chicago in 2019. I'm like, man, I'm lean. Like I did it. You know, I know I could get myself in shape. Andrew helped me the rest of the way. So, which was cool. It was still a collaboration. 2019 is when I went and got fourth at Olympia, and Andrew and I were still collaborating. And then we did off season. I did my next Olympia with him, and it got a little bit away from the collaboration to where, you know, I wasn't getting all the data I was collecting. I think we were missing some parts, and also our timeline got a little bit off, and we just didn't have the best showing. It's like. And my thing was with taking myself to stage was peak week. So I felt really good about everything else, but peak week I had never dialed in. Yeah. And being 212, it's been tough. I've never nailed it on stage. With Andrew, I finally did. So I think he really has a really good eye, especially in person, to dialing in a peak week. I was at the show with 5 other competitors, and every single person was on kind of this different peak, just catered to them. Like everything was different, and they all looked great. You know, so it's not like someone was really off, like they all looked on. And so Andrew really helped me understand what I needed out of a peak week, or maybe what I don't need. And so that was it after that Olympia. And I was like, I got this, you know? And so I've been coaching myself since this past Olympia, 2020. I felt like I needed to redeem myself. So I jumped into Indy Pro, then the New York Pro, and now the Chicago Pro, just being so close. And I feel like absolutely have nailed my best conditioning, and I've been able to walk on stage with a look I wanted to walk on stage with, and be proud of it. It just happened to be some really good lineups. So you hope to bring your best and win, but it just happened. That was the guys that show up you can't control. But I've been peeled, man, never this condition in my life, which made me feel great from a self-coaching standpoint. So I always felt like, man, if I can't do it to myself, how can I do it to someone else in a sense? But I've been able to definitely remove a lot of the emotional ties I have to making decisions. Nice. And I can look at my picks and set back and look at like I'm looking at a client, and not have any drive to like, oh no, you got to do this, or you look small, like refeed, or, you know, I can be more objective now since I've been doing it for so long. And definitely my peak weeks have changed. They're so simplified. So I kind of do this now, this nice, I'm ready. Like I'm ready right now. I can walk on stage. So I don't change much. It's like this little bit of a linear loading approach where I slowly walk up carbohydrates into the show. Water stays high, sodium stays high. And I find a weight that I look really good at across a certain amount of meals. And that's the weight that I try to hold on stage day and walk onto. And that's when I might reduce fluids a little bit, or food slightly, just on show day. And I've walked on stage, peeled to the bone, not using diuretics, not doing drastic water loads, sodium loads and things. And it's predictable. And I know it's not the sexy sell. And so if you come to my J3 University, I'm not selling crazy protocols, but that's for a reason. Because I want something that's predictable that you can utilize. So that's definitely changed. But yeah, you really kind of need to be objective with yourself, and it's just the hard part to self-coaching. And like we mentioned earlier, like the fatigue management has been huge now. I understand it so well. Like I feel excellent. Like people are like, you must feel like death, John. Look at your face. It's all scrunchy and like you're shredded. It's like, I feel amazing. Like I'll sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. Like
nice.
I have pretty good, mental focus, and I've gotten away. I used to Stairmaster hard. And that would kill me. It was like going to war every morning with the Stairmaster. Now it's all, for time efficiency, I'll do some like treadmill walking on incline. The rest of the time it's all step management spread throughout the day when I'm feeling fresh to do it. If I start feeling fatigued for too long, I stop and I just save it for the rest of the time. So I can spread out that energy expenditure as needed. Even food based, like my diet fatigue is so much lower. I'm not hunger focused because I can manage my foods better. Yeah. I used to diet on white rice. It's like, I'm so hungry.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so now it's like, well, I'm going to use oatmeal or pumpkin or mixed vegetables or butternut squash, or, bring in carbohydrate sources that have a good satiety index and move those meals to times when I'm hungry. Yeah. I'll eat a bunch of carbs before bed because I sleep better and I don't wake up hungry. Sleep is quality, so there's a lot of things that I can do on my own to make the process less stressful. And at least the perception is easier. But I think if you have a less perception of that effort and stress, you'll also carries into the physical as well.
Yeah. No, that's really
I know
cool.
We want to get in diet a little bit about what I thought about refeeds and diet breaks, et cetera, but
we'll have to do that another time. I think we'll end up talking too long.
Yeah, I'll keep rambling about my self-coaching, my prep. But yeah, I think that's honestly, Steve, like the biggest thing that has improved so much for me to get into this kind of shape has been my ability to manage fatigue to where I can actually take myself down to the body fat levels that I need to. Yeah. And it wasn't digging harder and working harder. It's like working smarter and understanding when to push, when to pull back, and during that kind of teetering process to eventually bring me down to this body fat level. And that's been the key to like what you'll see presented is me being very lean, along with my wife being very lean too, and she competes with me. So,
yeah, I think your conditioning, it's just standout. It's just, completely through the glutes, hamstrings, the stubborn areas, the Christmas tree. It's all striated. It's, like you said, you're ready. You could step on stage at any point, and but the listeners might be aware of that. I don't know if you know the kind of origins of the progressive linear load, but it came from Dr. Joe Klimczewski. I might have said his last name a bit wrong, but Dr. Joe. So like that's his approach. He loves,
he's like the diet doc, right?
Yeah. The diet doc. That's exactly the guy. So he's all about getting ready, like for peak week, be ready beforehand. And then it's simple. So I love that is something you've taken on. And it makes your peaking process a lot less complicated and much more simple, probably safer, I guess, as well.
It does. I've done everything. Like I've done all kinds of loads. I've used diuretics. And those are just such a roll of the dice, and you get through and you're like, we manipulated so many variables. I have no idea what happened.
Yeah.
And you can't go back and do it. So if anything, it's like, I tell people like learn carbohydrates. That's going to be the biggest thing that can change your physique. Like keep all the other variables stagnant and learn how you can change your body with carbohydrate and learning off. I think that's where you might have application for refeeds to learning prior to going into peak week. What type of amount you might need and how long you might get a little bit of a spillover, or what keeps you a little bit less spillover. So I think, it gives you a much more predictive approach, but that little bit you might gain from doing like a backload or something, it just throws a lot of risk there, which if like you are fat-free and lean, well, you probably don't really need to do much. Then the opposite is like, well, should I be doing more if I still have body fat on me? Well, damn, that might even be worse, because I've seen guys that still aren't lean. Then they wind up on stage like fat and flat.
Yeah.
It can't even be worse than that. Or what if you're fat and full? Well, who cares? Everyone's fat and full, right? That's off season. So yeah, I would say your best approach is probably just finding your best look that you have with the body fat that you have, and being at least predictive and being able to walk on stage with something that you're proud of, that's like maybe 5% off on the mark versus being like 20% off. Right.
Yeah. I think Scott Stevenson says something like aim for an A, not an A star, or something like that. It's something along those lines where it's like, it's just not worth the risk there. In terms of training, just quickly, is there anything you change in a peak week for training? Do you do like pump circuits, or like do you back off that week? How do you like to approach training?
Pretty much don't change much. Yeah. Okay. It's kind of like the same type of deal. Like, I'm not like being dieted. You're definitely in this slightly depleted state, but, I typically run my same diet training approach. It will pretty much serve a deload. So there'll be some set reductions. I will remove any type of exercise that present just too high of risk if I'm feeling like, and also ones that might be cause like excessive eccentric damage, like say an RDL or my good morning, like those beat my hamstrings up pretty much. So I might keep movements that are more isolation in the shortened state, but for the most part, like with how I'm going into a peak week, I'm not carrying this ton of fatigue that I need to drop off of. Like the fatigue's already low and managed, and eating up into the show, you start feeling better and better. So there doesn't have to be this drastic change in training, and I'm not doing any type of depletion workouts either, because I'm not trying to deplete then load. And so it's nothing changes. My consideration I do make is for travel days. If sometimes my travel day might land on a training day or an off day, so depending when flight times are, I might change that to an off day, because I think it could be less than optimal if I'm having to train at a completely different time of day or going super early in the morning. That might change. And then I will spread out some sessions at the end. So if I had, say, for instance, a push day, which chest, shoulders, and triceps for me, I might have a day where maybe I'll do chest, then I'll have my pull day. Then maybe the last session would be I'll throw on the delts and triceps and biceps. So the session would get really short, which I would manage fatigue. But that way I like it because it keeps me very consistent day to day leading into the show. Yeah. So that's one thing I have done different, because what I have found is like the day before the show, a lot of people just take it completely off. And then they also aren't doing any type of NEAT, and they're sitting around. Then you have to completely like adjust their energy intake. Yeah. So, and then like, or if they did the same energy intake, then you might have to like, they might eat too much and spill over the next day. And so what I found is like, if I just keep everything the same, I'm training every day, it's much more predictive for me with the process I'm doing of going into the show. So for New York and Indy, this was the first time I ever trained the day before the show, but it was very much more so like a pump workout, like I would do backstage. So I'm actually practicing my show day pump up the day before. So it's a great way to see, can I get a pump? Is this amount of carbohydrate essential? How does the look? I can go train around the same time I'd be going on stage. So everything's in practice for show day. So I've done everything prior to where the show day is never just this complete roll of the dice. And that's what I try to make happen on peak week. But as far as those other sessions, for the most part, they resemble my normal sessions.
Okay. No, cool. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because, like you said, if you have all these variables changing, you try and keep as much in a vacuum. So, oh, things aren't quite right. It's that's causing it. Nothing else going on because I haven't changed too many things. So this has been great, John. I appreciate your time, big time. And I'll have to pull you on again because there's other things I want to kind of dig at your brain. And like I said, I think people will want to hear more from you. So I appreciate you coming on. And if people want to, I guess, good luck for your show. This might actually come out after you've already competed. So maybe people will know. So we'll just have to see. But if people want to learn more about you, your coaching, everything like this, where should they head?
Yeah, so I haven't been taking on more clients for a while now, but to follow my journey, I'm most active on Instagram. So at John Jewett 3 is my IG. Also been putting out more on YouTube. So I do have like a prep series with my wife. She's doing her Wellness Pro debut in Chicago as well. And so on YouTube, just John Jewett. You can see our content there. And of course, I have a podcast, J3U podcast. And I have an education platform similar to you, not to compete with you, Steve, j3university.com. It's my coursework for learning how to use evidence-based bodybuilding, science focused, but also rubber meets the road. So I have a lot of practical application to take you through and just learn how to bodybuild and actually apply it and make progress. So that's where you can find and more about me. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on here, Steve. Like, I've wanted to come on here and speak with you for a while. I think you articulate so well. You're a great interviewer and have done so much for just the community and bodybuilding as a whole, it was really awesome to think back. I don't know if you know the gravity of how you're impacting so many people's journey and giving exposure to people that really are beneficial to the scene. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for having me on.
All right. I appreciate that a lot. And I probably don't know, and I hope I don't know, because I hope it's huge and like it's amazing. But I highly appreciate that. It means a lot. It's come from humble beginnings, but I'm so grateful that I get to spend time with people like yourself, John, and like get to give people more exposure if I can. So I definitely want people to check out your Instagram, YouTube. I was just checking out your full day of eating with your wife. So I'm a little bit through that. So yeah, it's fun to see.
People love just to see people eat food.
Yeah, so much.
I put up these training stuff. I'm like, this is awesome. And people are like, we want to see you eat food. I'm like, it's so boring. Like, but then I get on YouTube and I'll watch people eat food.
Yeah.
So Renee and I were like, you know what? We just need to record like our cheat meals or whatever we do and just let people just watch us eat. And we'll probably I won't even bodybuild anymore. I'll just let people watch me eat and
just do it topless. People will love it.
There you go. Until I'm fat yeah. In the off season.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. John, thank you again. And we'll catch you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.